Almost 30 years ago to the day, I sat with my two student lodgers in front of a tiny television set in the back kitchen of my terrace house in York and watched as the roads and shops and buildings that I'd known from childhood were transformed into a battleground.
More than 100 white and coloured youths fought a pitched battle against the police. Some were as young as 12, the oldest no more than 20. It lasted for 8 hours. The worst of the rioting came just after dawn, when police faced a hail of stones, bottles, iron bars and petrol bombs. The missiles were hurled from behind barricades of upturned and burning cars. At daylight, the police began a series of charges to break up the gangs massed in front of them. But as the rioters fell back, they set fire to more buildings. And sporadic looting, which had been going on all night, now spread. And still the bricks, stones and lumps of iron were thrown, worst of all the petrol bombs. The trouble started about midnight when gangs of black youths began stoning cars in the street. One owner said his windscreen was smashed and he was dragged from his car at gunpoint. Police had been standing by for trouble since Friday night, when 2 officers were attacked as they tried to arrest a motorcyclist. And tonight, police are on full alert in case the rioting breaks out again.
BBC Television News reporting on the 1981 Liverpool riots. But how are those days now remembered by the people who lived through them, by the police, the rioters, the residents? And how has our understanding of the reasons behind those dramatic disturbances changed over time? Well, just some of the questions which are addressed in a new book called Liverpool 81, Remembering the Riots. And the co-editors are Diane Frost, who's lecturer in sociology at the University of Liverpool, and Richard Phillips, who's reader in geography, also at the University of Liverpool. They're now with me. Richard, just let's talk with... I mean, we know that there were riots going on in other parts of the country in that summer of 81, Bristol, Brixton in South London. Just tell me about what was distinctive about the Liverpool riots in terms of their scale, their extent, their duration.
Right, well, the first riots that happened the year before in St Paul's and Bristol in 1980, the first of that wave. Brixton erupted in April 1981, and they were significant in the sense that petrol bombs that we just heard mentioned are thrown for the first time in mainland Britain. But in Liverpool, riots erupt in July, which run for a weekend. There's riots taking place in other parts of the country as well. What happens in Liverpool, though, is distinctive in terms of how long this goes on. We've got 6 weeks of riots. By the end of them, 150 buildings have been destroyed, 780 police have been injured, 1 rioter, at least 1 man on the streets, been killed. Countless others have been hurt, but those are not recorded. And countless members of the community have been put in prison, many held without charge.
I think people listening to this will perhaps be reminded of that if I say Toxteth riots, but you want to query the use of that appellation.
Toxteth is an interesting word because it's a word that the national media use. The national media use it to label a place. It's not a word that's recognisable in Liverpool. In Liverpool, the riots are very much identified by people with Liverpool 8. You might think that's a technicality and it's a pedantic difference, but what it really symbolises is the way that people in Liverpool feel that they've been described and labelled by a national press, and that's a symbol of that. So Liverpool 8 to people in Liverpool, Toxteth to the national media.
Yeah. Now, let me turn to you, Diane, because we heard just at the very end of that report the reference to the idea that the specific catalyst was the arrest of one young black motorcyclist. Tell me about, why should that particular arrest, why should that arrest trigger such an extraordinary chain of events?
I think the arrest of Leroy Cooper was the kind of straw that broke the camel's back, because I think what we found from the oral testimonies when we spoke to people was that the overwhelming consensus was that this arrest was really the last straw, and that this was indicative of months and even years of young people, particularly both black and white, but particularly young black people, black males within the Liverpool 8 area, had said that they had been intimidated, that they'd been stopped and searched, that there was a lot of police harassment, police brutality, and there was no kind of legitimate way, that nobody was listening to their voices, and there was no way to
So the idea that really it was unemployment or economic deprivation or whatever, because people have suggested that this is what lay behind it, particularly those people who tried to think about economic regeneration in Liverpool afterwards. But you appear in your answer to be concentrating upon the ways in which the police were involved in arresting, stopping, searching, harassing in general.
I think there's a recognition within the oral testimonies from the people that we interviewed that, of course, there was high unemployment, that there was a lot of social inequality and deprivation, multiple deprivation. And that is the broader context, the wider context. But of course, it was this day-to-day routine, stopping, searching, harassing, beatings that most of the oral testimonies would argue was the
and you've gone out of your way to get police perspectives on this. I mean, to what extent do these police perspectives, when you get them, confirm this?
Well, John Murphy, who was a policeman on the beat at the time and was involved in policing the riots, he's now the chief constable in Liverpool, and he acknowledges that though there were some efforts on the part of some police to be even-handed and to try to do things differently, he acknowledges that there was discrimination and that things weren't as good as they could have been. So it's really great to have a policeman reflecting back on that and saying that. But I think there's a sense that there's a journey which was needed to take place, as is acknowledged by that policeman.
Yeah, I think John Murphy concedes that the police were not as sensitive towards the black community at that particular time as much as they could have been, or that they weren't really aware, and that there were problems between the police and the community, with the police targeting particularly young black males.
I mean, if we look at some of the testimony which has been provided to you by the people who were some of the rioters' memories, I mean, some of those who participated were very, very young, weren't they? I mean, tell me about, for example, there's Michael Simon, I think, who was around about 13 in 1981. You make specific mention of him, I think, don't you?
Yeah, Michael grew up in the Liverpool 8 area, part of a larger mixed-race family, and Michael was out for something like 3 days during the disturbances because he couldn't get back home, and he relates in the book to all of the his experiences of being. He uses the term battered, a kind of colloquial northern term. He was battered endlessly by the police in the back of police vans, and whilst he was arrested and put in prison.
And all at the age of 13.
All at the age of 13.
Now, but this, I mean, we see a great deal of escalation going on during the days of the riot. Was this because there were a lot of people coming in from outside the area? I mean, one often finds that attracts other people from outside the area.
Yeah, the stories we hear, the word spontaneous is used by many people to describe the first day or two. It was a release, a moment where no one had really planned these riots. They happen, and there's a great outpouring of pent-up frustration. What happens after that, though, is that people do come into the area from outside, and there's a little bit of irritation inside that this local demonstrations become appropriated by who knows who. But then again, there's also a sense, I think, that the anger inside continues to be felt, and the death of David Moore doesn't happen for some time after the first weekend, and then there's a demonstration against the police that August. So there is a local strength of feeling which is built upon, but there's also a sense of the outsiders, and this is a story we get every time there are riots.
Because I remember seeing, I can still remember some of the pictures, and it was frightening. It must have been very frightening for the police as well, and what was going on.
Yes.
Things were javelin were being thrown at them, petrol bombs being thrown at them. Just the idea, of course, is also put around that this was just anarchic, unfocused protest, but there are some sort of indications from your research that people had some targets in mind. I think, Diane, Dave, a 16-year-old rioter, was talking about this club rackets. Tell me about why this was an appropriate target.
I think for David and perhaps many other young people, I think the Rackets Club was a private members club.
You should say it's spelled RACQUET.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
please go on. Yeah.
It was a private members club for the local elite, for judges and other such people, and it was based right in the heart of Liverpool 8. But of course, people within the community were excluded from going in there. So I think there was a sense for David and others that this was a kind of a target based on class, social class, because of the privileges that those people who used the club.
I think that also people will remember that what happened after the riots was, if you like, Heseltine's famous arrival in the area, with the idea of introducing a whole series of initiatives which might improve the situation. Can you pick up the story on that, Richard? Exactly what happened?
Well, Heseltine basically arrives and sets up a government in Liverpool. He's identified by the media as the Minister for Merseyside. What he tries to do is to shift the agenda back away from policing towards economic regeneration. He sets up a whole series of projects, none of which it's easy to object to. Projects for improving environment, projects for attracting private investment. They're all, I think, seen as quite welcome, but they're not focused on Toxteth, Liverpool 8. They're not focused on the real issues. Lord Scarman is running an inquiry at the same time, bringing policing into focus. But Heseltine is focused on economy. So I think all very well and good, and quite well received, but not really the issue that people locally want him to address.
So as you say, there are these economic initiatives, there are all those reports and inquiries, Gifford and Scarman, and Faith in the City. The churches were involved in Liverpool, weren't they?
That's right,
as well?
Yeah. So as soon as the riots are taking place, we see both of the bishops in Liverpool essentially joining hands and going out onto the streets. They're asked by the media to condemn the riots, condemn the rioters, and they don't not do that. They don't condemn the riots. They try to ask why the riots are taking place. But they followed that up with a whole, the Anglican Church, Faith in the City agenda, where they identify urban priority areas, and they produce a report which is illustrated entirely with pictures from Toxteth. So Toxteth, I think this is the important thing, Toxteth is used to create an agenda which is not just local, but it's national. So out of this place of deprivation, out of a place where people really haven't got much cultural capital, they're able to actually set a national agenda in terms of things like thinking about inner cities, in terms of changing police-community relations.
And therefore, Diane, when you speak to people, do they want to say, with reference to some of the things that Richard's talking about, that it was worthwhile? The rioters feel that they got something of what they wanted out of it?
I think it was a mixed picture. I think the so-called rioters felt that they had little choice. Lady Margaret Simey had said that she thought that the riots were inevitable because of what had been building up, because of the economic deprivation.
Yeah. So I mean, when you talk to the people, they say, yes, conditions have improved. Things are better now. Policing is now better?
I think there's a mixed picture. Most of the oral testimonies talk about welcoming the changes, but many of them are consistent in saying that the changes didn't go far enough, that many of these changes benefited business rather than local communities. The Garden Festival was very nice, but again, it didn't employ local labour. It used labour from outside. Policing has shifted. I think Wally Brown, one of the community leaders, talked 10 years after the riots about policing having moved on. But still today, people will still argue that policing is still a problem within the community.
Last quick word. I mean, the city's improved. Can we talk about multiculturalism of the city now?
Yes. So when Liverpool promotes itself as capital of culture, 2008, it uses the strapline to do that, the world in one city. And to me, that's embracing the things that Liverpool was afraid of 30 years ago.
Richard Phillips, Diane Frost, thank you very much.